Hello, I'm Anne Flaherty. This interview is part of a series of one-off interviews for the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith, London. For the past 25 years, the Centre has delivered the most diverse Irish cultural and educational programme outside Ireland. As part of its cultural remit, the Centre provides a platform for Irish authors to launch, promote, and discuss their work. Today, I am delighted to welcome Declan O'Rourke. Declan is an award-winning singer-songwriter, originally from Dublin. His music has been praised by people like Paul Brady and Paul Weller, and his songs have been covered by Christy Moore, amongst others. In 2017, his album, Chronicles of the Great Irish Famine, documented rare first-hand events from that devastating period of Irish history. Today, we're going to start the conversation about Declan's literary debut, a novel called The Pawnbroker's Reward, which is set in the town of Macroom and the surrounding area in County Cork in July 1846, just as news reports are coming in of a blight in the potato crop. The book has been widely praised for its subtlety in blending story and fact, and broadcaster Pat Kenny described it as a fantastic piece of work. It's already climbing up the bestseller charts. Declan, thanks for joining us this morning.
Hello.
How are you? Are you in Kinvara? Are you coming to us from Kinvara?
I am indeed, yeah, west of Ireland.
Very good. Declan, I wanted to ask you, how did the book come into being? I mentioned you had written songs, including a very popular song called Poor Boy's Shoes in 2017 as part of your album, The Chronicles of the Irish Famine. But can you tell us the wider story behind your interest in the famine and how it led up to this book being written?
So almost 21 years ago, while my mother and some of her siblings were doing some family research, they came across my granddad's birth cert. He was from this part of Galway in Kinvara, and they found that he'd been born in the workhouse. Nobody knew what that meant. We were all quite intrigued, and I set myself a kind of a goal to find out more, loosely, you know. But some months later, I was passing through Eason's in O'Connell Street and literally happened upon one of those baskets full of a book called The Workhouses of Ireland. I couldn't believe my luck, and I just thought, there's my opportunity to find out more. At that stage, I had no idea that the workhouses were anything to do with the famine. I didn't know much about the famine, and I don't remember really learning much about it in school. I remember it probably being mentioned, but no particular details at all. And I got on the bus on the way home that evening. I was sitting upstairs, and I remember opening the book, and you know, by the time I'd read the cover and that, I could tell that the genesis of these institutions was that period of history, the famine, which was, you know, nothing to do with how my granddad was born there 80 years later or so, but it was the lifting of a lid on that period of history. But most of all, what shook me and what drew me into it was, on page 1, I came across the story of the Buachalla family, and this incredible human story about this young family who had exhausted all possibilities and options open to them. They'd gone to the workhouse, and within a few short weeks, the 2 young children had died. They'd all been separated in there, and at that point, the mother and father, communicating through Irish because they weren't supposed to communicate, decided to leave. They got word to each other and they left. The wife was gravely ill and was probably sick with fever or typhus or something. And they began the walk home towards their little cottage, or buchan for the want of a better word, which was 6 miles distance. And after a very short amount of time, it was recounted by a neighbor of theirs. She couldn't walk anymore, and he began to carry her on his back. They were spotted doing this along the way, and he carried her for the guts of 6 miles on his back to this little home of theirs, and they were found dead the next morning. And the husband, Pádraig, was found kneeling on the floor with his wife's feet held to his chest, as if he'd been trying to warm them, the neighbor said. And you know, that that the image of that was so moving for me, so powerful. It was full of tragedy, of course, but there was something else to it, and it took me a long time to really figure out what I felt at that moment, I think. But it was beauty. There was a lot of beauty in it, and you know, it was almost a triumph over everything that had happened to them and the most dire circumstances imaginable, and to be brought to the point where all you had left to give your loved one was the warmth of your body, and then to give them that too, you know, in spite of everything. It's kind of a triumph of humanity and of love, you know. And I thought it was a universal story. I thought anybody in the world who read that could not help but be moved by it. I was also, there were so many emotions and feelings and thoughts all rolled into the same moment, I think. But one question was, why have I never heard this before? How do we not know this as a nation? And even further afield, it's like a tale of almost, I mean, tale is a strange word to use, but because it's real, you know, but of kind of Greek tragedy proportions. You know, Shakespeare would have, you know, thrived on a story like that, a scene like that. And but as a young songwriter at that point, which was, you know, around the year 2000 or 2001, I was still maybe 3 years away from my first record, but I was voraciously writing and part of a scene, and just cutting my teeth, I suppose. And this was really something that I felt instantly I wanted to share in song, and I did, and it led to a whole collection of songs which I took my time with over many years. It took me 17 years, but that was the first song, really. It took me 17 years to finish it. I wanted to make sure, I actually thought, and I was sure, that the academics would rip me to shreds for encroaching on such a serious subject in song. In the end, it turned out that I had a lovely experience where they kind of embraced me with open arms when I brought it out. I've become very friendly with a lot of them. But, you know, after that, I was sure that I was finished with that subject. I'd spent so long on it, took my time with it. I made 6 other albums while I was kind of concentrating on this in the background as a kind of passion project, you know. But when I finished and put the lid on it, sure that was that subject covered, I couldn't have been prepared for the things that started to happen after it. One of which was that I played a concert in Skibbereen 2018, so about 6 months after the record came out. And after the concert, I was approached by a lovely man who came to talk to me, and he said his father came from about a mile from where the Buachalla family lived. And he was, you know, quite sentimental about his father's memories of the area, and we had a nice conversation. And at the end, and we talked about the townlands, which are, you know, for, I'm not sure outside of Ireland if people know what townlands are, but in the countryside, even growing up in Dublin, I wouldn't have had a clue. But they're literally the names of crossroads and little areas within rural areas where, you know, you have no numbers on your doors or anything, but the postman will know what a townland is, you know, and they go much further back, but it's like a widened spot in the road, essentially, you know.
Mm.
And I asked him if he'd ever heard of a townland called Dirralee, which I knew the Buachalla family had come from or had lived in. And he just said, leave it with me, is the way he left it. And within a day or two, because I was staying around the area, I got a phone call to say that man has made a few phone calls, and he called his first cousin, who called his first cousin, who spoke to somebody in a shop on a corner, and what have you. And eventually they connected with the man who owns the land where the remains of the Buachalla's ruin, or their cottage, was exposed by a gorse fire a few years ago. And it was, you know, I was first of all blown away to hear that anything remained of their existence after
Indeed.
all that time, and after me singing and talking about it for 17 years and trying to, you know, exhausting any source of trying to find out more about them and finding nothing. All of a sudden I was going to be brought to see this place, you know. And so they drove me. You could have never found this place on your own, and you had to cross through people's land and everything. And eventually we had to get out of the cars, and they said, we're going to have to take Shanks Mare now, which I didn't know as at the time, which apparently it means on foot. So we went on foot, and we found ourselves climbing this hill. And at the top of this hill, you look for miles around, and all you can see is beautiful pastured land sweeping out in every direction, you know. But at the top of this hill, there was this, for some reason they had left, there was this outcrop of rock, like a ridge, with kind of overgrown around it. And on one side was this little footprint of a house, literally maybe no bigger than your smallest bathroom, you know, tiny. And that was the place. And we stood there, and it was the most profound experience, you know. And they asked me to sing the song I'd written about them, which I did. And I felt very naked without a guitar, but it felt strangely appropriate. And the man who had approached me and who brought me there and who'd set this whole thing up, he hadn't told me at the time. He turned out to be the parish priest of Skibbereen. And so I in turn asked him, would he say a few words? And he did. And it was very, very moving, very powerful. And I walked away from there just thinking that this story was not finished with me yet. And I had learned things that day standing up there that I could have never imagined, or, you know, at the time I was writing the song, you know, the guy who owned the land, his family had been there for generations, you know, and he said, when you stand up here, if you stood up here in the wind at night, he said, it would skin you alive. It's so exposed to the elements, you know, and you could just get this very tactile sense of what it must have been like to live there, you know, with so little and so in the way of facilities or any kind of luxury, you know. And around the same time, I was approached by a publisher, Gill, who had heard me promoting the record on radio, and they contacted me and said, would you come in and have a meeting with us? We loved the passion that you seem to have built up on this subject and the amount of knowledge you've built up over a number of years, and we would like to explore if you'd like to expand it into book form. So those things coming together. And last of all, a third element where I had accidentally written a short story about a month before. I'd woke up one morning and planned to write a song, and I had the day to myself, and it never happened before, but I at the end of the day, I ended up with a 20-page story, which I really enjoyed. And
Declan, was that story connected to the famine, or was that something completely different?
It was actually more like a childhood memory. It would be closer to, you could call it more of a memoir than anything else. But it was prose, and I just really enjoyed it, and I felt it was okay, and it made me go from never having any ambition to really move from songs into prose to feeling that I could do this, you know, when that call came. And it was like a nice little magic meeting of circumstances.
It certainly seems so. From, as you say, from originally finding out about your grandfather and the workhouse to then discovering the book in Eason's and becoming captivated with the Buachalla family story, and then actually writing the songs and going to the place where they had lived. I mean, it is an extraordinary tale. What you were saying there about not wondering how the academics would view you writing about historical events. One of the things that struck me when you said that was that while there have been very many books written about, you know, the famine and all the rest of it, but the human element, I suppose, the human stories are what draw people in, and that's very much the case here in the Pawnbroker's Reward. It is the story of Pádraig and Cáit and their children and their desperate plight, which makes it more real for the reader. I was wondering why you introduced the character of the pawnbroker, and could you tell me a bit about Cornelius Creed, who's a central character in the book as well?
Sure. So as I began to try to find out more about the Buachalla family, you know, and what options were available to them, how did they survive as long as they survived, and basically I was attempting to gather as many facts as I could and to put the pieces back together. And you know, that led me into archives and newspaper archives. And within a short amount of time, I started to find these other people in the area of Macroom. And, you know, it's very interesting what you said there about the human element and how that has the power to draw us in. And I absolutely agree with that. And I think if I had have picked up any other book on the famine at that point in time, when I first came across the workhouses of Ireland, that collection of songs and the book itself might not exist, because in all the books that I've ever read on the subject, I was never struck more than when I read that story, and it really set the benchmark, and it set me on a path of trying to find similar accounts that were so detailed, because, you know, with the greatest respect to the historians and the academics who have done so much brilliant work on the subject, sometimes what they had to work with was very meager, and some of the accounts from the time are almost mythical, or they don't seem real, you know, because they're kind of written in a I wouldn't say a foreign dialect, but a different kind of way of speaking from back then. And they've probably, that period of our history just suffers from being a little bit more disconnected than things that have come later, you know, such as world wars. You know, there was better technology, we have images and things to, you know, but I'm almost going off on a tangent here, but I hope it'll eventually feel relevant, you know. The the lack of accounts, you know, especially because most of the poor spoke in Irish,
Yes.
were illiterate, essentially. That doesn't mean to say they weren't educated or they weren't intelligent. They just didn't have the facilities of reading and writing, I would say. And so little. And then there was also the silence after. So, you know, a lot of what we know are stories that have been passed down through generations, and they've been colored, and, you know, and so getting back to Cornelius Creed, as I started to explore in this area, I started to find accounts, you know, and I felt as I began to know people in the area, such as Cornelius Creed, who popped up as an early source, you know, and he began as just a source because he was somebody who was corresponding with the local newspapers. And he was attending these meetings of the poor law guardians in the workhouse, which was a kind of a bird's eye view into what was happening at another level of society there, and local government, and you know, the effects were trickling down, you know. But he started to become the more and more I found of his writing, and the more I began to learn about him, and to, you know, he wasn't just relating information in a kind of journalistic way. Over time, you could see him developing as a writer and becoming much more like something we would encounter in the modern realm. He started to write opinion pieces to the newspaper, and he was venting his own feelings. And as that happened, I started to get to know him. I started to become invested in him and attached to him. And he went from being just one of a series of people who was popping up to becoming very, very central, because not only was he giving this information and real feelings that were contemporary at the time, but he was so centrally located. He was at the center of town. The Buachalas were 6 miles out, and all of these people like them were traveling in and out, you know. But he was like at the eye of the storm, you know. Literally, because he was a pawnbroker, the poor were crossing his doorstep every day. He was a middle-class Catholic,
Yes.
which there was a layer.
Yes.
No, and so he was in a very difficult position himself, because he was really, really invested in what was happening to the poor below him, of his own kind of people, if you like. But he also was interacting with the Protestant ascendancy.
Yes.
He was and he was seeing what was happening at every level and relating that to us. And I've figured, you know, that I couldn't have found a better person, and I'd never come across anybody like him in all the years reading on the subject either. And it led me to the point of kind of feeling that I had the opportunity to do something I don't think had been done before, or I haven't come across it in this field. And that was to show people how this thing unfolded through the lens of a single town.
Yes, the community, representing all the layers of the community. Because I don't think you could have maybe sustained a whole book with the Buachalla story. This then gave it much more a broader context, didn't it? And I suppose by using Cornelius and his and the reports of the meetings of the guardians of the workhouse, you were able then to put in that historical fact of how they were thinking. And at the same time, you know, Cornelius as middle class, but also a person with the conscience, how that you were able then as well to contrast his lifestyle with their lifestyle, so that those poor people were existing on a little bit of cabbage. And, you know, there's one very striking moment where he goes to a birthday party with his wife, and you describe, oh, you know, all the food and the warmth and the comfort that they are living in. And I thought that contrasted really well then with the poor who were doing the backbreaking work, walking miles to break stones every day. They were docked money if it rained. They might have one piece of griddle bread to eat for the whole day. And so there was that contrast, you know, obviously between the different lifestyles. So the whole community is represented in the story.
Yeah, and that made his position all the more complex, didn't it? Because he had a guilt complex, I suppose, you know, and that made his personality all the more fascinating. And he was a beautiful writer too, you know. He was a real intellectual, and I actually think, from having gotten to know him, I think he was what we would class these days as probably a little bit on the spectrum. He was almost high functioning, I think, and a little removed at times in certain elements of his personality, but obviously deeply caring in other ways, you know. I was personally fascinated with him too, and it became, as you say, essential that he I was just kind of following the dots and the breadcrumbs and putting it together, and I couldn't not have him central in the end, you know. And I started to see it as the book as like this tree that maybe came from the one root but had these two big branches, and one was Creed and his kind of what was happening around him, and the Buachalla out a little further out.
I just wanted to ask you, Declan, about the difference between songwriting and tackling a big historical novel like this. How did you go about writing it? How did you go about researching it? And were you mainly writing it during the lockdown?
I'll start at the end there. It's a great question. I began the book around mid-2018 after the experience with visiting the Buachalla's cottage and speaking with the publisher and that. But it really, with other work, touring work and young family here, things like that, I was struggling for a while to develop a really solid routine with it. And but as well as that, I was also experimenting at a certain point with styles of writing, and I had a few kind of early chapters that were from different parts of the country, and they were almost like short stories that were going to be connected, and they didn't end up being included, but in the end I realized they were essential for me figuring out what I wanted to do. Eventually I was drawn very specifically towards the Buachalla's story and going back to the source of what inspired me on this subject. But really, when lockdown kicked in 2020, I had actually gone away a week before that, and I'd said to my wife, I'd said, I'm literally gonna apply myself really with a serious discipline from here on in, you know. And I went away for a week and stayed in this little cottage in Mayo, belonged to my aunt and uncle. And it was during that week that lockdown happened. But from that point on, until we'd say June this year, when we've submitted the final finished manuscript to the publishers, I almost never missed a day. And I locked myself in a room every day for a minimum of 3 hours. By the end, it was sometimes there were like 10-hour days or 12-hour days. My wife was pulling her hair out saying, you know, she started to describe it as the other woman, you know, because I'd go into this room and I'd be just gone. But, you know, I absolutely thrived on that, and I've never had the opportunity or the experience to immerse myself so deeply in anything so consistently for so long. I actually got t-shirts made for me and my editor, who came in to the process early this year, you know, and the t-shirt says, "I spent lockdown in 1846." Because it was kind of true, you know. But the big difference, and the only real difference I found between songwriting and this kind of writing, was that you had to physically put yourself in a place and have a strong routine like that. You know, with songwriting, you can do it anywhere. You can be doing it on the go. You don't have to sit at a desk because they're so short. You can literally remember the words in your head. And a lot of the times when I write songs, I invariably don't, you know, I take notes, but I don't write down finished thing. I don't touch an instrument even until the song is finished in my head. But with the book, because it's so much more dense and so it's just colossal in terms of its length and breadth by comparison, I knew I had to sit down. You can get your inspiration when you're walking around or when you're in the garden or in the bathroom or whatever for a certain scene, but literally you've got to dig into the research and you've got to sit there and write and write and write physically. And yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was just thinking that, well, two things. I was thinking two things. One, you may not have ever got around to writing it if you'd been touring, which I don't know, perhaps some of your, I mean, I'm sure a lot of your gigs were cancelled because of the lockdown. I've forgotten what the second thing is.
That's okay. The first is plenty for now.
Well, that the fact that you had that time to sit and do it, it was amazing, you know, and it's kind of a gift in a way, you know. Oh, yes, I know. The second thing was that it struck me that when I was reading it, that terrible sense of things being out of people's control, you know, events which external events happening which were controlling their lives, things they couldn't control. It reminded me a bit of our own experience with the pandemic, really, you know, that things are happening that you can't control and you're struggling, and it becomes about survival. And, you know, I wondered if maybe that might be part of the appeal to people at this point, because you know, I think that people can identify with that struggle. Do you know what I mean?
I do indeed, and I do believe there is an accidental parallel there, you know, and maybe it's helping it to resonate with people more. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, because I guess before they pick it up, they don't know that they're going to feel that resonance. So I'm
Yeah.
not sure, but you know, it's interesting you brought that up, because my editor, for a start, in at one of our launch events, he said that he didn't feel that this book could have been written at any other time, and he felt that somehow the pandemic and the similarities of, as you say, very, very aptly use great words to describe it, that, you know, the loss of control and things being out of our control. He thought that filtered into the book, and I found it interesting to hear that, but I knew that was not the case, because, you know, what I wrote was literally a transcription of what I was experiencing and reading in 1846. It was nothing to do with what was happening around me. Or, you know, I think it was absolutely accidental. Not accidentally,
Yeah.
coincidental, you know.
Yeah. Well, for example, I felt that at the very beginning, particularly where Cornelius Creed, where it opens up, where he is looking at reports coming in of potato blight, and he, you know, has that feeling of, oh, I hope this isn't going to get worse. I hope this isn't going to. And at the same time, Pádraig is out there with his potato drills, and he's absolutely terrified to dig them up because he's worried, you know, of what he might find. And so I suppose in the same way as we, as, you know, a community, every time we hear of something to do with a new variant or whatever, we worry and we panic. How are we going to get over this? So those were the kind of elements that I thought were similar to what we're going through now.
You're certainly right. You're absolutely right. And I think Conor was right too, in that it is very palpably similar. You know, there are certain echoes within the two. And I find that fascinating. It is interesting, and maybe, as you say, maybe it's helping people to identify it with it. Yeah,
or have an empathy certainly for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very devastating period and what people went through, because as we know, the book is based in 1846. So it's, you know, there were several more years to come of potato blight, and of course the start of the whole emigrant trail then after that. And you have your own experience of emigration, isn't that right? Because your parents went to Australia when you were a young lad. Can you remember what that felt like, having to leave Dublin?
Yeah, I was 10, and you know, from my perspective, people sometimes ask what's it like to have, you know, the same question, and really I think not, I don't know any different, if that makes sense. So, but it was incredibly normal for me in a way, because as I said, I don't know any different. It was kind of a fairly smooth transition, and yet I know what it's like to be the outsider arriving in a new place. We came back 4 years later, and even then I felt like an outsider, and to be this kind of foreign body in the soup, if you know what I mean. And there are certain things you have to do, certain mechanisms you do to blend in, and things like that. So I absolutely understand it. But because I'm white, it was very easy for me. You know, I only have a small taste of what it must be like for somebody in much more difficult circumstances. You know, we came from Ireland in the 1980s. It was 1987, and there was a recession going on here. And there was actually a call in the newspapers. My parents responded to this, I guess. My uncle, who's been out in Australia, or at that point in time had been out in Australia for maybe 25 years, had just come home and visited for the first time. And so there was a gate open to us there. We, you know, we were kind of told we were welcome to come, and but the call in the paper was, you know, they were looking for tradesmen and people with education, and my father was a carpenter. And so given that there was a recession and times were hard, even though he had work here at the time, they saw it as an opportunity for a better life for their children. And they took it and gave us that opportunity. We all have Australian passports now, which is a lovely advantage to have. But you know, it's just a taste of what it must be like for people who have to do it. I can't say I relate to that, if that makes sense. But I can imagine it. And, you know, I think it's a huge issue in the modern realm and something that the world is struggling with very badly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. On a positive note, of course, Declan, it was when you went to Australia that you got your first guitar and started to play music. And again, that's a very kind of random thing. There seems to be a lot of coincidences in your life. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
I can't, that's it on the wall back there, actually, behind me. Well, my parents were visiting some friends of theirs. Well, let me put it, it's always complex to try and say, but when you're abroad, this thing happens sometimes. You'll get letters from somebody saying, oh, such and such from up the road is living out there. And that happened. And we became friends with, or my parents became friendly with this couple who they probably never met or would have associated with at home when they were living up the road. But, you know, we became very friendly with them then. And they had an uncle up the countryside, out in kind of really out in the sticks, up by the Murray River, between on the border between New South Wales and Victoria, a place called Kyabram. And he was a parish priest up there, a Catholic parish priest. And I think we went up, my parents would kill me for saying this, but they were getting some marriage counseling that for a weekend. Thank God, I think it worked, obviously, and you know, but we were up there for the weekend, and I suppose that was part of the whole immigrant thing. There's, you know, my mother was very homesick, and we were running up big phone bills, and you know, there was a lot of tension around things like that, and which eventually led us to coming home 4 years later, as I said. But that weekend, anyway, we stayed in this house, and there was a young priest. I now know the word for it is he was a deacon, and he had a couple of guitars lying around, one of which is hanging behind me here. And I snuck off a couple of times, and you know, I loved music, and I kind of hid away in a room with this guitar on my own or something. It just was holding it and trying to figure out what to do with it. And this young priest came along and he showed me two chords, and that was lovely. I remember he showed me C and G, and that was it. And that, but then on the Sunday when we were leaving, we got in the car. We were just about to pull away. It happened to be my 30th birthday, which I don't know had anything to do with it. But as we were about to pull off, he ran over and tapped on the window and he said, "Oh, you left something. I think this belongs to you." And he gave me that, you know, which I still very moved when I think about that, because it was what a gift. And, you know, he changed my life in a way, you know, so,
do you know if he's aware of the, you know, the trajectory of your career since then, Declan, at all?
I'm not 100% that he's aware, but I do know he left the priesthood and got married.
Okay.
Lovely for him. And his name was David. I always remembered that, but I don't know anything more about his life since then.
I'm sure he'd be amazed to find out now that you're kind of an international singer-songwriter.
It would be nice, and I'd like to think that he would be proud of himself, I suppose, and knowing that a small gift can go a very long way.
Absolutely.
No.
And just on the music career, then obviously you've finished your book and you're promoting it at the moment, but you also have a new album out called Arrivals, isn't that right? Which was produced by Paul Weller. And again, some of that deals with the immigrant experience, because that actual title song, you were playing the piano in the video at the railway station and at the airport. You're talking about people coming home after that long separation from their families.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're right. The song Arrivals itself came out of my own experiences, spending lots of times in airports, either arriving or leaving, and one particular time recently when that same uncle came home from Australia again, and I met him at the gate, and I was standing there for a while, waiting for him to come out, him and my aunt, and I was watching all these other people jumping on each other and hugging, and and it was really profound. These days, I don't often get to be the person who's waiting for someone. I'm usually the guy coming through. So it was a lovely, eye into that part of things, and to see other people doing it. I believe a lot of people do that, like a train spotting kind of hobby thing now. I've learned since I put the song out, and I can understand why, because it's very life affirming to stand there and watch people. It makes you really appreciate what you have,
You mean they go to the airport and watch people arriving?
Yeah,
just
and watch them reuniting, and that kind of, I suppose it's a portal, that particular place where people come through and meet their relatives and loved ones again,
And it's particularly at the moment, I think, because of the COVID pandemic, and we have the brief periods of time where people can travel, and then there are more restrictions. And I suppose coming up to Christmas as well, that's a song that would resonate with a lot of people, especially those who've been separated. I was just wondering if now you're planning to go touring again, or whether you're waiting to see what restrictions there be, and whether you might also turn your attention back to writing another book, or continuing with another famine story.
That's a lot of questions, but it's good. Great. I have toured already. I had a tour of the UK there about a month ago. Well, I'm back maybe 2 or 3 weeks now, and it was really, really enjoyable. I have an Irish tour in March. That will be the first real. I had a couple of small shows locally here in Galway just before the UK tour, which turned out to be a great they were really, really enjoyable, and turned out to be a great kind of springboard into the tour as well, getting the machine back up and running. But I'm looking forward to the shows in March. And in terms of writing another book or more books, I absolutely feel like I have the bug now, because it was, I think you always feel like your latest thing is the thing you're most passionate about. But certainly I feel writing this book was the most enjoyable thing I ever did. And I've opened Pandora's box in some shape or form. I realized while I was writing it, because I wasn't playing music obviously during the pandemic, certainly not publicly, and I played a bit of flamenco here for kind of hobby's sake, but creatively I was really, really so engaged with the book and consumed by it that there was no room for music, and I didn't miss it. I didn't miss writing songs. It's the first time in 20 years that I wasn't chipping away at songs in the background, And I realized it was kind of a revelation for me that I'm just a creative person. After all those years identifying or calling myself and believing I was a songwriter specifically, I now know I'm just a creative person, because I used to draw a lot in early life, and at a certain point it was a choice between playing music and art. But any of those things, and I think they spiritually, they kind of tick the same box. They do the same thing. And creativity is just something you do that makes you feel centered and kind of zen. I think it doesn't matter what you're doing to achieve that. I think, certain people believe, and it's easy to sometimes get caught up in being confused about art and creativity being the means to an end, and that you hope to achieve something at the end of it, which is success or wealth or fame or whatever, but really those things are all secondary. And ultimately, if you don't enjoy the work as you're doing it in every moment over minutes or months or years or whatever, then the rest means nothing anyway. And so I'm very much excited about the prospect of writing more, and I want to write another book soon and another album soon, and who knows what else. So
well, it's a fantastic achievement, and I enjoyed reading it very much, and wish you the best of luck. Look forward to your next offering, and I suppose for now we'll have to say goodbye, and hope we'll see you sometime maybe in the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith, London, whether it's talking about your next book or whether it's playing music. We'd be delighted to see you.
Sounds great, Anne. Lovely to talk to you too. I very much enjoyed your questions, and glad you enjoyed the book.
Thank you very much, Declan. All the best for now.
All the best.